That afternoon, Fort Lauderdale Airfield was shrouded in a silver-gray veil of clouds. The sea wind howled in from the Atlantic, carrying the sting of salt and slamming against the TBM Avengers parked on the runway. Their dark blue fuselages and folded wings looked like seabirds at rest, waiting for a simple training flight. No one in the squadron imagined it would be their last. Commander Charles Taylor made a brisk inspection. He glanced at each fuselage, tapped the wing locks, checked fuel and oil. On paper, everything was in order. But one detail escaped his eye: the small radio antenna mounted on the aircraft's spine. Just a thin metal rod, linked by a coaxial cable inside the cockpit. After hours of previous training flights, its mounting clamp had begun to crack. The coaxial cable had loosened slightly, and the contact surface had long since been corroded by sea salt. At first, it made no difference. The engines roared, Pratt & Whitney's vibrating with thunder, and the squadron lifted off the coast. The ground shrank away, Florida disappearing under a thin veil of clouds. The radio glowed bright, air traffic control's voice came through clear. Flight leader, heading 091, maintain altitude 1,500 feet. Copy. Maintain 1,500, Taylor answered firmly. His tone was steady, the signal sharp and clear, like a taut steel wire connecting them to land. In the cockpit of Kai, the youngest cadet, the headset was still crisp. Only the rush of wind filled the fuselage, but minutes later, the anomaly crept in. A faint crackle, bled into ATC's voice. It was weak, almost harmless, but a pilot's ear was sharper than any instrument. Kai frowned, pulled off his headset, wiped it, then tried again. The static remained. Outside, the sky darkened. Walls of thick cloud closed around the formation like slabs of stone. Moist sea air condensed into a mist that clung to the metal skin. That very moisture, infused with salt, seeped into the antenna's contact points, blooming a thin green patina of corrosion. No one could see it, but its effect was obvious. Transmissions began to warp, sentences lost their endings. Fort Lauderdale, this is FT-28. Heading, Taylor called. But on the ground, the controller only heard 28, heading, before the rest dissolved. A command cut in half, like a page torn mid-sentence. In Kai's cockpit, the sound raised the hairs on his neck. The radio was the lifeline of the mission, the nerve cord tying them to safety. If it weakened, it meant they were drifting beyond reach. He glanced at his wingmen. No words were spoken, but everyone had heard it. At altitude, the antenna shook in the wind. Each tremor loosened the coaxial cable further. Each rattle dimmed the signal, like a bulb flickering out. None of the airmen realized their lives now hinged on that fragile strip of metal. Time passed. The sky thickened into heavy gray, swallowing the last light. ATC still transmitted, but the voice had changed, distorted, drawn out, as though echoing from a cave. Heading 0, 6, 0. The sound in Kai's ears stretched like words dragged through water. He pressed the switch. Leader, do you copy? Only static answered, metallic hissing, like steel grinding steel. The cause was now undeniable. The antenna's contact had oxidized. The thin layer of rust blocked the current, turning smooth radio waves into broken shards. Each broadcast splintered. Some fragments reached the tower, others vanished into the ocean. In Taylor's cockpit, frustration grew. He called again and again. Fort Lauderdale, this is FT-28, do you read me? But on the ground they heard only fragments. Florida, not sure. Heading. Communication had become one way. They could still receive sometimes, but when they spoke back, no one heard. The deadliest illusion of all, believing connection remained when in truth they were flying inside a vacuum. Kai began doubting even his ears. He strained to separate voices from noise. Sometimes he thought he heard ATC calling his name, but when he glanced at his comrades, they shook their heads. The radio was turning voices into ghosts. Leader, is it possible the tower can't hear us anymore? One trainee asked, his voice shaking. Taylor paused, then replied, We hold formation. The tower will pick us up again. But deep down, he knew the antenna had betrayed them. In the wet, salty air, things only deteriorate. On the ground, controllers kept calling, FT-28, turn west, head back Florida, over. But the airwaves returned only silence or long howls of static that faded into nothing. In Kai's cockpit, the silence was worse than noise. It felt like the ocean itself swallowing human voices. When night fell completely, the radio was no longer an instrument, but a torment. Each time Taylor keyed the mic, the squadron held their breath. But instead of orders, they heard wails of feedback, metallic shrieks, or a handful of warped syllables stripped of meaning. The antenna, small, overlooked, had become the traitor. It didn't snap, didn't burst in fire. It simply weakened bit by bit. A cracked mount made it shiver, a loose cable bled its signal, sea moisture birthed green corrosion. Tiny faults combined into a death sentence. Kai pressed his headset tighter, desperate for a sliver of hope. But the harder he listened, the more he heard chaos in the silence. Voices tangled with noise, commands melting into meaningless echoes. He asked himself, was that the leader's voice, or only interference? The other cadets sat in grim silence, eyes bloodshot from strain. They understood now. The radio could no longer be trusted. Everything depended on instinct and guesswork. But in a starless night, over an endless ocean, instinct was a double-edged blade. Taylor forced his voice to stay steady. Trust your compasses. Hold formation. But the compasses were already spinning and the radio was gone. Their two vital instruments, navigation and communication, had failed. In that moment, only the silence of sea and sky remained. No one knew whether they were heading toward Florida or plunging deeper into the Atlantic. And all of it began with one small flaw, an antenna giving way. Kai closed his eyes, headset still clamped on. In the stillness, he thought he heard the ocean itself whisper through the static. That afternoon, the Florida coast lay blurred beneath a thin veil of salty mist, like a piece of gauze stretched over the pale blue sky. Atlantic winds tilted the line of palms and carried the briny tang of the ocean across the runway, mixing with the smell of engine oil. Inside the hangar, the squadron gathered around Commander Charles Taylor as he ticked off the pre-flight briefing. Route, weather, primary, secondary frequencies, and contingency for weak radio. On the technical side, the mechanics reported generator output within standard, batteries full, belts tight, electrical bus showing no fault. Everything read green. They taxied out. One by one, the TBM Avengers rolled from the hangar's shade, noses swinging toward the runway. At the holding point, Taylor scanned his checklist again. Fuel mixture, flaps, oil temp, pressure. The needles were steady as a pond. He flicked the gen switch, green light steady. Good, he said, calm, as though repeating an ancient ritual. Takeoff. Asphalt roared beneath the wheels. Fuselages trembled, then lifted, buoyant like dolphins breaking the surface. At 1,500 feet, the squadron formed up, navigation lights flashing. The radio channel was clear as glass. ATC called a vector. Taylor read it back with clipped precision, no wasted syllable. For the first 10 minutes, the radio was a bright steel wire, taut, flawless. Then, in Kai's headset, a faint pop, like an air bubble breaking. Next came a whisper of static, the sound of salt scattered on tin. He froze, glanced at the bus gauge, 27.7, 27.5, 27.3 volts. The needle dipped a notch, then held. He reported on intercom. Bus dropping a little, still stable. Taylor acknowledged. Keep an eye. The wind shifted, forcing them to skirt a low rain cell. Taylor flipped anti-ice, pitot heat, nav lights, formation lights, and briefly lit the weather radar. A sudden surge of load bit into the bus like piranhas at bait. Volts dropped, 27.0, 26.8, 26.5. The gene light flickered, tired, then steadied. The radio still carried voices, but the static layer thickened like cotton. The mechanism was simple and merciless. The generator spun with the engine, feeding the aircraft. Heavy loads dragged voltage down, regulators strained to compensate, but old wires, oxidized joints, and a battery long fatigued by months of training flights faltered. What they couldn't buffer bled straight into the radios, the most sensitive organ aboard. ATC's call came. Flight, turn 060. But the last syllable dissolved, like a seam sewn too hastily, missing its final stitch. Taylor switched to the backup channel. Distortion worse. Cut non-essentials, keep nav lights, radar off, heater low. His tone was clipped, frosty. The crew snapped switches dark. Voltage 26.4. Gen light pulsed brown, then steadied. The static remained, moss clinging to every word. Kai felt the strangeness. Numbers still within limits, yet his nerves insisted they had crossed a line, a mental threshold where one notch of the needle weighed like a stone. He recalled a lesson. Low voltage doesn't kill instantly. It hides a blade in the voice. They turned around another cell. Taylor briefly flashed landing lights to check wing surfaces. On, off. Just 2 seconds of added draw. Voltage 26.2, 25.9. The radio hiccuped, a heartbeat of silence, then a sharp crackle. Leader, repeat. Say again. Blocked. Voices colliding in a narrow corridor. Taylor turned to SOPs for power discipline. Reports. 7-word limit, transmission short, push to talk quick, no filler. He eyed the generator gauge, listened to the engines. If the bus slipped further, the radio's frequency synth would drift, the electric compass wander, even fuel pumps might falter. Minutes dragged, sweat beating slow. 26.1 volts. Kai heard his pulse beneath the static. He muttered, "At this load, battery drops another 0.3 in 10 minutes. Taylor replied, "Mark T+10 for review. Maintain vector." Between terse exchanges, they hooked their hope to time marks like buoys. At T+10, drizzle spattered the canopy. Taylor raised pitot heat, brightened formation lights one step to keep sight in cloud. Voltage 26.0, 25.8. The gen lamp blinked yellow. Pause. Yellow again. ATC's voice warped. Yao Rioi. Priority. Low altitude turbulence. The word priority twisted into tie before sinking. Kai suddenly understood. Voltage loss was no knife but a pillow. It muffled ears, smothered mouths, strangled words. They still flew, engines alive, but the metal heart flickered under load, and each flicker was enough to drown a command. Cut more non-essentials, Taylor ordered. Heater off, radar off, landing lights off. Formation low. Cold swept the cockpit, salt and oil sharper on the air. Voltage crept back. 25.9, 26.0. Just a notch, but a breath regained. Hold steady, Taylor said. From now, we fly on disciplined power. Night gripped the sea like black velvet. Above, Avengers drifted between two voids. Cloud overhead, abyss below. In that vice, the radio was their lone candle. But a new storm rose. Not from the sky, but from their engines. The generator itself began to scatter RF interference, metallic rain across the airwaves. In Kai's ears, thin whines pierced between voices like wire spurs. Each throttle tweak spiked the noise. Each power reduction eased it. Too clear a pattern. Leader, interference rises with RPM, could be generator brushes or ignition leak. Taylor nodded. Copy. Hold RPM steady. No pumping throttle. The static warped consonants. S smeared into hiss, F into puff, T into dry ticks. ATC's order, turn west, hold, was skewered by a metallic snap. Not lost entirely, but jagged, fatiguing. Taylor adjusted tactics. 3-second transmissions. Lead with verb and number, drop fillers. Internal comms, use signals. He trimmed their speech to survive the static. Noise crept into ground paths too. Aged bonds, corroded paint, weakened grounding straps let stray RF strike the radio's chest. Each strike stole a beat. Kai thought, language has a heart. Interference knocks it off rhythm. Cruise RPM fixed, noise settled into a rhythmic hiss. Then came harmonics. Generator whine overlaying VHF. ATC gave a secondary frequency. Kai tuned. Why? A whistle stabbed his ear. Shifted down, the whistle turned to groan. Down again, voices warped ghostly. Taylor ordered, stay on primary, secondary for check only. Inside they recalled classroom theory. Ferret beads? None. Shields? Old, brittle. Bonding straps? Some cracked like biscuits. No fixing aloft. But they could fly the discipline. Steady RPM, no cycling inductive loads, short transmissions, 2-second guard before, after PTT to avoid overlap. Leader, I'll try guard 121.5, Kai suggested. On guard, less chatter, less noise. He called a time check. Time 4-2. A distant airline replied, copy time. Suddenly, they had a common clock. The squad's spine in the dark. Interference played subtler tricks, aligning with engine rhythm, luring the brain to mishear static as words. Taylor countered with the 7-variable brevity and NATO numbers. Leader, North 20, heading 060, 2000, fuel 325, holding, time 44. Clear, discrete stones. Noise rolled past without dislodging meaning. A rare, clear burst. Priority, return west, report fuel. Taylor front-loaded. Turning west now, fuel 320. Time 46. Even if the channel died mid-sentence, the command would stand. Grammar against interference. By T+50, they distilled survival to 4 anchors. Headings, altitudes, fuel, time. Power sagged, static gnawed, but their words had learned to stand even as the sky tried to swallow them. And when the gen light finally flickered, then winked dark, Taylor gave the last order. Blackout comms. Heading altitude, fuel time only. What followed was language stripped to bone, each word bought by watts, each second guarded by silence. And in that austerity, they found clarity. The rhythm strong enough to let them hear each other, even when the sky no longer wished to speak. That afternoon, Fort Lauderdale wore a strange sun, golden but cold, as if poured through frosted glass. Ocean wind, heavy with salt, rushed through the palms, making the fronds flutter like waves. Inside the hangar, tools clinked lightly on the floor. The squadron gathered around the whiteboard, where Commander Charles Taylor drew quick chalk lines. The training route, primary VHF frequency 121.9, secondary 121.5, guard, and one underlined sentence. If radio degrades, speak short, mark time, revert to minimal script. The avionics technician reported briskly. Radios held lock, synthesizer stable. Early bench checks showed no drift when cold. That phrase snagged at Taylor's ear like a hidden splinter. When cold. He knew once airborne, radios never stayed cold. Everything warmed, then heated. And heat made oscillators. Drift. They rolled out. Wheels rasped the runway like stones across sandpaper. Takeoff, nose rising, gear folding, fuselage light as breath. At 1,500 feet, formation steady, wing lights dimmed. Kai, the youngest trainee, adjusted his headset, heard ATC's voice sharp, clean. Flight leader, turn heading 091, climb and maintain 1500. Taylor, copy 091, 1500. Every syllable crisp, struck like iron. For 10 minutes, everything matched the textbook. Then, after they slipped past a dense cloud mass, the avionics warmed by a few degrees. In Kai's cockpit, something minute appeared. Frequency error 0.0110 mHz. Too small to see on dials, but enough to shave the edges of speech, thinning final consonants. He thought it was wind hiss, until Taylor asked ATC to say again. Salt spread in Kai's chest. Inside the trembling fuselage, the frequency synthesizer kept grinding. It built the desired channel by mixing references, dividing, locking phase. On the ground, it had latched neatly, but in the air, heat crept like sand in a boot. The crystal reference swelled, the VCO drifted, the PLL clung but slid. A few KHS, nothing on paper. In the ear, voices lost their faces. ATC. Flight. Vector 060. In Kai's headset, 0 stretched. Z. Row. Throaty, as if the speaker were pinched. If their radios slid 2 to 3 kHz, while ATCs held true, the overlap between them frayed. Words still passed, but fringed with hiss. Leader. Mild distortion, Kai reported. Likely frequency drift. Heat. Taylor. Mark time. Switch to 7 variable plus NATO. Front load verb and number. From then, every call was crated like cargo. Leader. North 20. Heading 060. 2000. Fuel. Tree 45. Holding. Time 25. It sounded machine-like, but in the haze of drift, machines endured better than humans. Human speech wavered. Machine cadence cut through. Drift ticked upward when pitot heat and anti-ice came on. Heat seeped into the panel, plastic warm to touch, circuits looser. Taylor toyed with offsetting plus Yoton 5 Merz, an old gamble. Once it caught a peak and voices sharpened, but side noise flared. He snapped back to primary. Hold channel, short transmissions. State time. The danger of drift wasn't total loss. It was the gray zone. Everyone thinks they still hear clearly, but meaning leaks. Kai realized he was guessing as much as hearing, his brain painting over missing syllables. Filling gaps is the shortest road to error. Starboard light 20 degrees, number 3 called. Drift smeared 20, slicing it mid-phoneme. Taylor cut with a 60-second beacon check. Verify by signal. If no lock in T+01, discard. The minute became a fulcrum between truth and illusion. Result? No beacon. Drop. One phantom fell away. Sunlight faded. Cockpits glowed cold green. Static thickened. Synth lock still showed solid. Of course it did. The PLL was locked to a warmed, wandering self. Taylor. Accept drift. Speak like rivets. Short, hard, stamped with time. The squadron understood. From now on, language itself bore the burden of crossing heated sky. Night descended. Beneath lay ink ocean. Above hung lead cloud. PLLs still locked, but VCOs swayed with every breath of heat. The radios, keepers of shared tongue, now staggered like seasick men, upright but unsteady. Kai heard ATC's words rocking gently, like placed on a hammock. Extended, it dulled the brain, not drunk but seasick on syllables. He gripped controls, spoke against the sway, hammering his rhythm over the drift. To counter unstable synths, Taylor split roles. One voice for heading, another for fuel, another for time. Shorter sentences meant less risk of snapping mid-hammock. Leader, heading 060, time 59. 2, fuel, tree 05, time 59. 3, holding, time 59. Puzzle pieces locked without overlap. He banned multisyllabic clutter, replacing them with heavy monosyllables. Hold instead of maintain holding pattern, west instead of proceeding west sector. Because when drift smears vowels, only hard consonants cling. A temptation lingered. Slide frequency a few kHz to catch the hammock. Taylor refused Dyson night air. Hold frequency. Hold sentence mold. Hold time, he said. If their synth drifted up while ground drifted down, the gap could double. On the ground, text could recalibrate. In the sky, men must recalibrate speech. Near base turn, signals swayed harder. Maybe antenna angle, maybe cloud ionization. ATC's weather call came jagged. Taylor loaded his reply heavy front. Copy winds 27012, turning base at time 63, final at 65. He set future in stone, knowing PLLs could unlock any instant. This was the core. Machines hadn't betrayed them. They were loyal to physics. Heat drifted, cold contracted, vibration nudged. The betrayal was human expectation of permanence. Taylor accepted the radio's humanity, then braced his own. Blackout drift, he ordered, a variant of blackout comms. For 2 minutes on final only, heading altitude fuel time. Slow, round, monosyllables. No long readbacks. Any word not buying a safe touchdown was banned. Leader, heading 060, 2000, fuel tree 00, time 64. 2. Copy, time 64. 3. Holding, time 64. 4. On my wing, time 64. 5. Negative beacon, time 64. Like drums, like looms, like hearts. City glow flickered pale left. Runway gleamed silver thread. Drift swayed, synth shook, but clocks don't lie. At time 65, they descended. Hold, release, 2 words of lead. Wheels kissed runway, skidded, reversers roared, pumps flashed green. For a beat, silence. Then ATC, clear as a bell from a well. Welcome back, FT-28. Commonplace words, but to ears drunk on drift. It was music. In Dawn's debrief, Taylor drew 3 boxes. 1. Frequency offset signs, thinning syllables, edge distortion, squinting to understand. Response, 7 variable, plus NATO, front load, mark time. Avoid live retuning aloft. 2. Thermal drift signs. Voices melting, ghost echoes, hammock cadence. Response, reduce panel heat load, slow, plus rounded speech. Timestamp to kill ghosts, 60s verification windows, conservative defaults for clipped endings. 3. Unstable synthesizer, PLL VCO. Signs, rhythmic wobble, phase sway, worsens with angle or turn. Response, split sentence rolls, heavy monosyllables. Blackout drift for critical phases, shared clocks replace radbacks, never overtune. He added a line beneath, radio is an instrument. Don't force it to sing opera in a storm. Drum steady rhythm instead. Kai wrote in his log, wait sentences up front, so tails can drift without loss. Time is the anchor. Without it, words turn ghosts. When circuits sway, humans must stand still. Fewer words, heavier beats. Don't fight drift, bridge across it. That night, outside the hangar, he heard wind whistle through the flag halyard. Its frequency wasn't exact, but its rhythm was true. And he knew. Tomorrow, if the sky drifted again, they'd still come home, so long as human rhythm held steadier than machine error. That afternoon at Fort Lauderdale was thick with the smell of salt. Along the shoreline, rows of palms swayed lightly, as if nodding to the TBM Avengers lined up for their turn. In the hangar, mechanics had just finished patch painting areas of skin pitted by sea corrosion. The new coats of paint gleamed smooth like fish scales, spreading seamlessly across the spine and fuselage. No one paid attention to how the paint had crept over the bare metal rings around grounding points, where braided copper bonding straps bolted to the airframe to create the RF ground plane for antennas and radios. Charles Taylor walked through his pre-flight. Oil pressure, temps, hydraulics, green, prop bolts, locks, inspection covers, secured. Near the cockpit spine, the VHF antenna sat, a slim, dark alloy fin, its base mounted to a plate. Ideally, the base ring should have been bare aluminum or allodened for clean contact with the aircraft skin. But under the yellowed fluorescent light, Taylor saw the base sealed over with fresh paint. "Looks neat, huh?" a mechanic said with pride. Taylor nodded, though his eyes lingered on a screw slot half filled with paint. A small clue of too clean maintenance. Kai, the young trainee, tested his headset. On the ground, VHF came through crisp. HF was fine. The simple SWR meter showed within limits. Nothing alarming. But Taylor knew, a ground plane isn't like a wire you switch on or off. It's the silent stage on which RF plays. If paint insulated or corrosion grew, RF return wouldn't flow smoothly through the fuselage. It would scatter across rivets and joints, each dirty contact acting like a tiny resistor, a seed of noise. "Remember the weak radio note," Taylor said in the brief. On the board he wrote, "Grounding, bonding, RF plane." Paint too perfect can be a problem. If bonding is poor, we'll see. 1. Background hum linked to RPM. 2. Reduced comms range. 3. Static discharges in clouds. 4. One-way reception. Rule: keep transmissions short. Mark time. Guard channel for time calls only. Lost comms follow the pre-brief schedule. They taxied out. Runway seams thumped the fuselage like plucked strings. Takeoff, gear up, level at 1,500 feet. ATC called Vector 091, Taylor read back clean. First 10 minutes, smooth. Thin cloud-like tissue brushed across the canopy. Inside, the radios were glass clear. Then came the first hint, like a sigh. A faint background hiss as engines settled to cruise RPM. Not loud, just like salt sprinkled on tin. Kai frowned. The bus meter read steady, 26.9, 27.1 volts. Taylor asked, noise changes with RPM? Yes, seems in step. He logged it mentally. Not a power source issue. More likely RF return, struggling through painted or corroded bonds. They skirted a low rain cell. Cloud edges foamed like soap. Pitot heat and anti-ice went on. Inside, hiss deepened, and voices thinned at their tails. Final syllables clipped. Kai tweaked squelch. Background dropped, but ATC's range felt shorter. Ground calls faded faster as their angle to the antenna changed. Behind the panel, RF was searching for its way back into the airframe, the vast metal plane that makes an antenna whole. But paint had insulated the antenna base, even the star washer's biting teeth. With its serrations filled, the screw only bit into paint, not aluminum. RF wandered into rivet lines, through salt-rusted joints, each one a hot resistor at VHF, bleeding strength and spawning noise. ATC. Flight, turn 060, maintain 2000. Taylor. Copy 060, 2000. His reply was sharp, but when number 3 called, right light 20? Steady? The word steady was shredded by static like a dull knife on paper. Taylor didn't argue by ear. He set a 60-second beacon check. Silence. Just hiss. No beacon. Drop. Another phantom discarded. Taylor noticed a faint violet-blue glow along the wing edge. St. Elmo's fire, licking as they passed moist ionized air. Normally, static wicks and clean bonds breathed off harmlessly. But if grounding was poor, charge trapped, seeking paths through hinges, bolts, even headset wires. That explained voices thinning, like wrapped in cellophane. Note this, bonding issue, Taylor told the formation. From now, verbs plus numbers front-loaded, always with timestamp, guard only for time calls. No long readbacks. He rebuilt language to survive in fading comms, the only system they could still control when the airframe's voice was muted beneath paint. The sky closed. Clouds knitted into a tunnel of gray. The sea turned velvet black. Inside, hiss bred new children, sharp ticks with each fuselage shutter. Every wing rock shaved syllables off ATC's voice. None could see it, but the RF return path was stumbling across dozens of patchy points. Paint, rust, loose screws. One small slope each, together, a mountain pass. Kai shifted in his seat, headset pressed tighter. Still, the comms bubble shrank. Normally, they'd hear ATC 8,100 miles offshore. Now, 60, 70 and voices were thin. Leader, range loss looks like ground plane mismatch, he said. Transmit power's fine, but SWR high at certain angles. Copy, Taylor replied. We can't fix in flight. We'll fly to help the radios, minimize steep banks, keep RF line of sight to shore as long as possible. This was flying to cover for failed grounding. They couldn't scrape paint midair, but they could shape their path. Taylor added a time mark rule. Range check every 5 minutes via guard time calls. If below threshold, return via pre-brief route. Static crawled. More St. Elmo's fire flickered. Some bonding strap was cracked, turning smooth static bleed into sparks that hissed into headsets. ATC. Flight. Turn west. Report fuel. The word fuel fell away. Taylor front-loaded. Turning west now. Fuel tree 20. Time 41. Verb hus number up front. If tails were eaten, the scent still carried. Number 2 added, "Leader, one way? I hear them. They don't hear us." "Expected with bonding loss," Taylor said. "We'll broadcast intent with time. If no correction in T plus 01, we act." It was the one-way rule. Treat silence as consent, so long as the clock was marked. Another false light appeared. Number 3 again called, "Right light 20, steady." Taylor forced discipline. "Verify 60 seconds." Silence. Drop. Trust the frame, not the ear. Kai shivered. He imagined the braided copper straps, brittle with salt and heat. Screws corroded, threads thin. Paint covering where metal must touch metal. Beauty swallowing function. They pushed through ionized cloud. Noise climbed and fell like surf. Taylor commanded, "Blackout comms in 2 min blocks. Only heading, altitude, fuel, time, no readbacks." Each word now a pebble across a stream. On guard. Time calls every 30 seconds. Time 4:4:45. Even a distant commercial voice replying gave them a human tether. "Signal strength check," Taylor ordered. Each pilot gave one-line reports. Enough for him to decide, hold west, prepare for return route, execute if no objections in T plus 01. Hiss fell like sand rain, but now there were clockstones to step on. Why not simply turn back earlier? Because training isn't for when everything works. It's for when pieces fall away. Today's lesson: when the aircraft loses its ground, people must become the ground for each other with language, discipline, and time. At last, shore glimmered faint through ink. ATC flickered clear for 2 beats, then dim. Taylor sealed the plan. Turning base at time 5:09, final at 6:1. No debate. The clock came. Wings dipped. Hold. Release. 2 words of steel. Wheels kissed runway like raindrops finding sand. Taxiing in, the hiss ebbed like fever cooling. Under hangar light, the Avenger's skin sparkled with dried salt. Taylor ordered the antenna base opened. The culprit stepped into view. Antenna base fully painted, where bare metal should meet skin. Star washer teeth buried in paint, gripping only enamel, not aluminum. Pretty, but insulating. Bonding straps frayed. Copper strands green, some broken in half. Enough for DC continuity, but RF hated the inductive, lossy mess. Shim joints overpainted, forcing RF to detour bolt to bolt, creating resonant stubs and dead spots. Static wicks worn, corroded bases loose. No wonder St. Elmo's flared. Taylor didn't scold. He read the fix like a survival checklist. Strip paint at bonding points, Aladdin bare patches, replace star washers and apply conductive compound, not paint. Fit new weatherproof straps and measure RF resistance, not just DC. Renew static wicks, mask no paint zones around grounds forever. The mechanics nodded, chastened. One admitted, "We thought full paint meant better protection." Taylor smiled. "Paint protects against salt, but RF needs bare skin to breathe." Hours later, VSWR fell to clean limits. Test transmissions thick and round again. No clipped tails. Background noise now soft as a blanket. Static wicks gleamed like fish whiskers in the dark. That night, Taylor laid 2 plates on the table. One bare aluminum, one glossy painted. "This one," he tapped the metal, "is the ground of your voice. This one," tapping paint, "is pretty, but it muzzles the ground. Bonding is the silent hero. When good, no one notices. When bad, everyone argues in the sky." Kai's notes read, "Good grounding is invisible, but audible. DC tests lie. RF needs wide, clean bite. Paint is raincoat for skin, but duct tape for ground. When the ground goes mute, speak less, harder, with time." Next day, they flew again. Same damp air, same salty wind. But ATC's voice now full, rounded, tails intact. When number 3 repeated, "Right light 20, steady," Taylor checked beacon, This time, it sang back instantly, sharp as metal on metal. The squadron chuckled quietly in their headsets, the laughter of men returning home. Up there, where salt eats metal and wind strips words, they learned a simple truth. Electricity seeks ground like water seeks slope. If ground is blocked by paint or rust, signals swirl astray, and when signals wander, humans must rebuild shorelines with discipline, clocks, and lean words. But best of all, open the ground's path, scrape the paint, renew the straps, give voice back to the metal skin of the sky. Evening bent over the wing edges. Taylor tapped his pen. Talk, talk, talk. Remember this, he said warmly. The radio is the string. The ground plane is the resonant box. Without the box, the string is just wire. Kai gazed at the sea, thought of last night's glossy paint, today's bared aluminum. He smiled, writing one last line. Keep the ground clean. Keep the human voice whole. That morning at Fort Lauderdale carried the faint smell of salt and warm metal. Soft columns of sunlight fell across the TBM Avengers, their dark blue fuselages gleaming, wings folded tight like pressed sleeves. In the hangar, mechanics finished their notes. Radio system, good. VHF antenna mounted aft on the left side of the fuselage, base secure. HF wire antenna along the tail, tight. One young mechanic patted the left side panel where a blade antenna jutted from the aluminum skin like a fish's fin. We put it on the left side this time, smoother airflow, he said half-jokingly. No one objected. The placement looked aerodynamic, even elegant. But beautiful is not always correct. Commander Charles Taylor passed by, his eyes lingering for half a second on that fin. According to standards, the best spot for a VHF antenna was on the dorsal spine or belly, where the RF line of sight was broad, less likely to be shadowed by wings, tail, or engine cowling. Mounted on the left flank, it risked blind zones whenever the aircraft banked left, when wing and fuselage cut across the antenna's path. Taylor glanced toward the row of palms outside, their fronds whispering faintly like weak radio static. He thought of asking again, but time pressed. Training schedules left no room. Check it thoroughly after the flight, he murmured. They took off. Wheels left the runway, fuselage lifting like a fish clearing a wave. ATC called a vector. Taylor read back clean. The first 10 minutes were flawless. Radio as clear as glass, formation steady at 500 feet, sunlight flashing along the wings. Kai, the young cadet, looked left. The little fin antenna caught the sun, and for a moment he thought of it as a talisman of safety. Then came the first gray wall of cloud, thick as coarse cloth. Taylor banked left 20 degrees to slip past its brighter edge. At that moment, ATC's voice thinned, like the tail end of a thread breaking. Flight, turn 0, and then silence. Kai frowned, adjusted squelch, and saw the signal needle fall by half, only to recover once Taylor leveled out. Leader, when we bank left, the signal weakens, he reported. Taylor nodded, jotting T+111 into the notebook strapped to his thigh. At the second cloud cell, Taylor ordered a 30-degree left bank to stay below the ceiling. This time, ATC nearly vanished during the turn, leaving only a hiss. When he leveled out, the voice returned as if a door had been opened. Number 2 observed. Looks like the left wing is blocking RF line of sight. Which side is the VHF today? Taylor asked. Port side. Sir? Noted. The geometry snapped into his mind. Antenna on the left flank, aircraft banking left. Wing and fuselage become a metal wall between antenna and ground station. Low-S cut in chunks. A minor installation choice turned into an on-off switch for human voices. Below, the sea dulled to gray steel. Above, the sky broke into staggered shafts of light. Taylor steered through a brighter gap with a slight right bank. This time, ATC was sharp, every word intact. Leader, vector, maintain. Kai glanced at the portside antenna, now unshadowed, bathed in RF from shore. He realized radio wasn't tired. The wing had simply been standing in the wrong place. Not only wings, vertical stabilizer, horizontal tailplane, even the engine cowl could block, reflect, or scatter signals. With the antenna on the left flank, the entire left-hand architecture of the aircraft became terrain for waves, slopes, cliffs, valleys. Bank left, mountain in the way, bank right, open plain. Taylor adjusted his flying to match physics. When reading vectors or times, keep wings level or a light right bank, he instructed. Flying for the radio may sound strange, but today the radio was their way home. Soon, number 3 called again, right light 20, steady. The familiar phantom. Taylor didn't rush. He knew that when the port wing rose, the antenna was in shadow, making false signals more likely. He ordered a 60-second beacon check, wings leveled. Result? No beacon. Drop it. An illusion stripped bare by geometry. Kai exhaled. He grasped a simple but hard lesson. Antenna placement dictates the grammar of the sky. Mounted wrong, words must travel the long way around. Mounted right, they fly straight as arrows. And in flight, the bank angle becomes a translator. Left tilt, mute, right tilt, speak. Inside the clouds, light broke into shards of silver. Taylor called for a shallow descent and another left bank. Instantly, ATC sounded muffled, as if locked in a cupboard. Level again, the voice returned, as if the yoke itself were a volume knob. The truth was straightforward. VHF is line of sight, but not a thin line. It travels through a Fresnel zone, a bulging cylinder of space. Any large object, wing, tail, fuselage, cutting through it can cause loss. Antenna on the flank meant the Fresnel zone was often bitten into by the left wing, especially in left banks. A dorsal antenna would have left it free. Kai visualized it. A glowing Fresnel bubble, dented each time the aircraft rolled left. Enough of the bubble gone, and speech itself warped. Roll right, and the bubble healed, words whole again. He had once seen the diagram in a classroom. Today, he heard it in his headset. Reflections, multipath, compounded the problem. Signals bounced off tail, wing, or fuselage and reached the receiver out of phase, some canceling, some amplifying, making voices bulge or thin unpredictably. At certain angles, the effect worsened. Taylor ordered, important readbacks, level wings or slight right bank. Front-load verbs and numbers with time. Maximum 3 seconds. They practiced. Fuel tree 30. Time 38. Copy. Voices landed solid like boots on ground. Later, ATC shifted them to a secondary frequency. During the switch, Taylor instinctively held a slight left bank against crosswind. And at that instant, the new frequency faded. Leader, you copy? Only hiss. Yet guards still carried their time calls. Taylor marked it down. Stick to primary during phases with left banks. Switching while shadowed was gambling. Phantom lights reappeared. Taylor enforced his 60-second verification window, wings level. This time, the beacon replied with a sharp pip. Not a mirage, only their own wings' shadow earlier. A golden slit of sky opened. Taylor rolled right 30 degrees, radio crisp as glass. Kai looked at the port side antenna, freed at last, basking in RF sunlight. He pitied it, a mouth told to shout while half covered. By dusk, Taylor formalized the rhythm. Front-load verbs plus numbers. Add time. Max 3 seconds. Readbacks under slight right bank if possible. A choreography of flight, electronics, and speech. Kai scribbled, port side antenna, left bank or scrum shadow, loss. Port side antenna buoys, right bank, open, full signal. Frequency changes under shadow, Moisan silence. Fresnel cut, multipath, Morrisonings, broken syllables. Solutions, fly for RF, short phrases, anchor with time. Static hummed, steady now, almost like background music. The squadron had stopped fighting the sky and started carrying each other's words across the gaps. Night dropped like a lid of lead. Below, the Atlantic was a black well. Above, wet roof tiles of cloud. Taylor laid down the schedule. Base turn at 5-9, final at 6-1, blackout comms, heading alt fuel time only. And one last caution. In critical 2 minutes, avoid deep left banks if possible. Readbacks when level or slight right. Not superstition, just geometry proven by experience. On final, a gust forced a brief left bank. Radio thinned for a beat, then healed as Taylor leveled. Hold. Release. 2 lean words, heavy as lead. Wheels kissed runway. Reversers roared. Green lights flashed. The descent unfolded like a rehearsed score. No wasted words, no wasted banks. Back in the hangar, static gone, Taylor gathered the mechanics. No scolding, only a chalkboard. He drew RF paths, Fresnel zones, shaded wing shadows, multipath arrows. The mechanic who'd mounted the antenna flushed. We placed it flush with panels, thought it looked clean. Taylor nodded. Clean for the eyes, hard for the ears. He ordered surgery. Remove the VHF antenna from the left side. Relocate to the dorsal spine aft of cockpit. Strip paint at the base. Ensure metal-to-metal ground plane. Mark no mount zones along both flanks, prone to wing shadow and multipath. Route coax shorter, away from power bundles. Test on jacks. Simulate left-right banks. Measure signal, strength by angle. Map dead zones. 3 days later, they flew again. Same damp air, same wind, same cloud. But now, in left banks, ATC's voice held firm. In right banks, it was thick as if whispered at the shoulder. Kai looked up. The new dorsal antenna sat tidy, like the dorsal fin of something built to swim. Beautiful to the ear, he thought. Right light 20. Steady. Verify beacon. Beacon confirmed. The 60-second ritual no longer felt like doubt, but respect for structure. Taylor wrote 4 lines in the debrief. Antenna placement, grammar of radio. Wings, tail, engine, terrain of waves. Fly with terrain, words arrive. Fresnel isn't classroom theory, it's breath of speech. When geometry strangles voice, change geometry, or change the mouth's place. Kai sketched a Fresnel circle, dorsal antenna marked, wings shading arcs. He captioned, "Keep wings for words." It sounded like a joke, but felt like truth. Weeks later, storms returned. Again they flew under cloud. Radio's their lifeline. The dorsal antenna stood above wing shadows, opening another horizon of line of sight. Amid wind and rain, their voices still carried. Because placement was right, angle understood, words disciplined, time trusted. At the end, Taylor tapped his pen 3 times. Talk, talk, talk. Remember, he said, half engineer, half musician. The radio is the voice. The antenna is the mouth. Placement is the stage. Stand behind a pillar, and shouting is wasted. Stand clear, and even a whisper arrives. In the salted wind, everyone understood. Sometimes the smallest choice of placement decides the fate of words in the sky.